Hello, good people of YouTube. Mountbatten here, and battleships. Battleships are one of the most popular classes in World of Warships for good reasons. They have massive guns, tons of armor, bristling with secondary guns. Who wouldn't want to play a battleship? Most new players pick up a battleship as their first class when they start playing World of Warships because, well, we hear all about them in, History Channel documentaries and such, and it's very much how I found myself stumbling into the game all those years ago. But with World of Warships quickly approaching the 10-year mark, things have certainly changed throughout the years. So in today's video, we're going over what battleship line is right for you in the year of our Lord 2025. What I'm going to be doing is going through each of the individual lines in the game, talking about what the line plays like and whether or not, you may want to pick it up for today's World of Warships, as yet again, a lot has changed over the last 10 years in this game. If you look at the timeline down below, I have broken the timeline up into the sections where I'm talking about, the nation's battleship line. So if you want to, just hear about this battleship or that battleship line, check out the timeline down below. I would encourage you to sit there and listen to each line at least, so you have an idea of what each line plays like and such. This tends to be one of the more popular questions I get asked on stream and in the YouTube comments. Hey, Sea Lord, I'm looking at playing a battleship line. Which one do you think I should play? Well, we're going through all of them today, boys and girls. Let's go ahead and get started. By the way, these are in no particular order. They're literally in the order that I wrote them down on my notepad. So, yeah, no particular order. Alright, let's get started with the American battleships. A little bit biased here, right? But anyway, the American battleships, really funny that we get all this talk about Soviet bias and such, but there's only one line in game that has 3 battleship lines in it, and that's the American. So we're going to start out with the Montana line. The Montana line is simply where I would suggest most new players start out their battleship adventure, because the Montana line will teach you the fundamentals of the game very well. And you can come back to the Montana line and take it and use your newly learned skills and go much further in the game. It's a really good, solid line. It's one of the oldest lines in the game, as it is the same age as the game. So the Montana line it's an interesting adventure for sure. From tier 1 to tier 7, you are stuck in traditional dreadnoughts and super dreadnought battleships. They're slow, but they have larger caliber guns for their tier, usually. And when you start to get to the higher tiers, you start to unlock the American Super Heavy AP, which, TLDR, it's a heavier shell, so it hits harder, has more alpha damage than same tier counterparts, same caliber shells. So it's a bit punchier of a round. That helps out a lot because the American Montana line tops out at the 16-inch caliber when it comes to their main battery guns, which you get honestly pretty quickly with the Colorado at tier 7. Now the Colorado is it's something alright, because you have to grind through it 3 times if you want to get the Montana, the Vermont, and the Louisiana. It's a bit of a struggle bus in today's World of Warships. Well, it's always been a bit of a struggle bus, but yeah, so there's that. That is something you may want to consider if you're thinking about, staying for a while in the American tech tree, grinding out all 3 of the lines. You may want to take a break because you're going to be stuck playing the Colorado a lot. But anyway, because it does get its 16-inch guns at tier 7, the Colorado can overmatch a lot, and that, has a lot to do with why it's balanced the way that it's balanced and all that jazz. So there is that. But once you get past the Colorado and the Montana line, you get the North Carolina, the Iowa, and then, of course, eventually the Montana. And what all 3 of those ships have in common is that lovely Mark 8 Super Heavy American AP, which allows your 16-inch shells, again, to do, a lot more damage than you would suspect a 16-inch shell to do. However, the big downside of the 16-inch Mark 8 Super Heavy AP shell is that the air drag coefficient and the velocity out the tubes is terrible. With the North Carolina, you're coming out at like 702 meters a second, which is ungodly slow. It's like the shells are just rolling out of the barrels of the guns. So aiming at ranges much further than 16-17 kilometers with the North Carolina is it's something alright. You have to give the target a huge lead to actually hit them past those ranges. The the Montana and the Iowa, their guns are a little bit longer. They have the 50 caliber barrels, so the velocity is, I believe, 752 meters a second, which is a little bit better, which means, 17, 18 kilometers is where you'll typically peter out with the comfortableness of the American 16-inch Mark 8 Super Heavy AP shell. So anything past that, you're going to have to be doing a lot of predicting and such, which is kind of good because, it is teaching you that, hey, look, you need to predict, you need to get good at it. And once you get good at predicting targets, then, that's half the battle in Battleships, right? Then you can start, getting shells on target and doing quite well. The American Battleship line also has the improved Battleship heel, American Battleship heel, starting from the Colorado going on up. It's not a super heel quite like the Conqueror super heel, but it is very much an improved heel, and it helps quite a bit in today's World of Warships. The American battleships, especially the North Carolina and the Iowa, you definitely don't want to be showing broadside because their citadel is not that overly hard to get to, especially the North Carolina. In fact, when you're in the North Carolina, just forget that your number 3 turret exists. Angle sharply into the enemy ships. Use your front 2 turrets. Imagine it's an American Jean Bar. You'll do magical things compared to other North Carolinas that get deleted left, right, and center. Iowa, bit better armor scheme than the North Carolina, faster as well, and it's a really, really wonderful Tier 9 premium ship, which takes us to the Montana. You get 12 16-inch guns with the Montana. This whole line from the North Carolina on up, they're more of a mid-range battleship, mid to close-range battleship, because again of the air drag coefficients of their shells and the slow velocities and such. So the best played from mid-range, looking for broadside cruisers and such. Don't be afraid to swap over to HE either if someone goes bow into you, because you do have 16-inch guns. So you very much, you might have to swap one over to HE and burn things down, which they are pretty good at, especially when you get to the Montana with its 12 16-inch guns. But you should primarily be firing AP in the first place, especially if you get somebody's broadside. There's a very, very few things in the game will make someone reconsider their decisions as much as seeing a broadside Montana's broadside coming at their broadside, right? So they're a really solid line. You should very much grind them out as your first battleship line, in my humble opinion. They'll teach you the basics, and again, you can come back to the Montana and do magical things later on. All right, the second American battleship line, the Vermont. The Vermont is a what-if line. What if if the American Navy stuck with the super dreadnought design rather than the modern fast battleship design? So the Vermont line, they're slow. They peter out around 20 knots top speed, of course, with the speed flag, and brisk. You can get them going up a little bit faster than that, but the trade-off is they have lots of big guns. Once you get past the Tier 8, the Kansas, you do actually get 12 16-inch guns at Tier 8. That's pretty good, but from there on out, it's like the Vermont, of course, has 12 18-inch guns. Now they're 457mm guns, not 460mm guns, so they can overmatch 32 millimeters of armor, but you do have quite the heavy hammer to drop down upon the enemy's forehead, because yes, it also gets the Mark 8 super heavy AP shell, so these 18-inch shells hurt like hell. Now, I'm sure many of you have been on the receiving end of a Vermont to know this, but yeah. Now, the Vermont line, oddly enough, they too are also more of a mid-range line. They used to be kind of geared towards a longer-range gameplay, but Wargaming came back, retuned them, and now they're more of like the mid-range gameplay. So imagine like a Montana, but with a sledgehammer instead of a ball-peen hammer. So yeah, or I should say, instead of having a sledgehammer, it has, a crate of dynamite or something, right? Because, man, these 12, 18-inch shells friggin' hurt. It's not uncommon to see a Vermont completely delete somebody, be it a cruiser, or be it a battleship, if they get lucky and their shells find the ship's citadel. It absolutely can do it. Oddly, too, the Vermont's surprisingly maneuverable. They gave the Vermont line the improved acceleration parameter because, well, they are sluggish ships, but you can get going up to 20 knots pretty fast, and you can turn surprisingly well, too. So, yeah. Now, you do have a 40-second reload, and you are a massive target as the downsides of the Vermont line. It's so easy to farm down a Vermont. Look at it. It's a big girl, right? So there's no shortage of real estate to get HE spammed or SAP spammed, or, have the carrier bully you, although you do get DFAA. But, man, when you're not getting bullied, you are the bully with those 12, 18-inch guns at Tier 10. So if you like more of a mid-range, kind of behind the Montana range-ish play style, and you like looking for those opportunistic shots, the Vermont line is very much for you. Surprisingly, they are not terrible in a close-in engagement. I'm not saying go brawl with them, but again, that maneuverability definitely helps when they do find themselves in those sticky situations. And of course, with the 18-inch guns, you can overmatch 30 millimeters of armor. So cruisers, man, you see like a Des Moines or really any cruiser trying to hug an island, there's a very good chance you can just go straight through their nodes and remove half of their HP with the Vermont's guns. Now, the Vermont and the Montana, they do get the special American Plotting Room Mod 2 module, which gives you a 10% buff to your dispersion. So very nice dispersion out of these battleship guns. They also have one of the most consistent dispersion patterns in the game, so there's that. Now the Louisiana line. Yeah, it's a Montana with a flight deck. If you like being a bully and like a hybrid battleship and you want to, you know, bomb people with your HE bombers, yeah, but we don't talk about that too much here. Alright, moving on to the British. So, the first line is, of course, the Conqueror line. Now, the British battleships, they are all about HE. They get the British BB HE with the improved HE damage and the improved HE fire chance. I mean, Conqueror, it's such an easy ship to print Witherer, and also a very easy ship to print the Dreadnought achievement in as well, because you do get that Conqueror super heal. Now, the Conqueror is coated in 32 millimeters of armor. Its citadel is very much exposed, but, you know, if you do eat a bunch of shells to your citadel or eat a bunch of damage, just pop your super heal and you can repair a good chunk of that damage back. But really, like, if you're just getting HE spammed, you don't really care, because, you know, all of the fire damage is 100% recoverable. So if some poor cruiser's been burning you down, just pop your heal and you'll see pretty much, not pretty much, you will see all that fire damage come back with one pop of your heal. It's not uncommon to see Conquerors reprint like 75% of their HP with one go with that super heal, so that's very nice. Now, in addition to the HE with the main battery guns, the AP is also surprisingly good, and you know a good Conqueror player when you see them swap between HE and AP, because the AP, it's short fuse AP. It has a shorter fuse than the standard battleship AP, which means that cruisers get deleted a hell of a lot more when you shoot at them with Conqueror AP versus other battleships AP, because those other battleships have the longer fuse time, so it'll overpin their armor, whereas the Conqueror AP will actually penetrate their armor and deal that, you know, that alpha damage to the cruiser. So yeah, when you see a broadside target, don't be afraid to load AP in the Conqueror. You can use it on battleship extremities too, because it will pin their bow and their stern instead of overpin like other battleship AP does as well. So that's very nice. Also has, you know, good concealment with the Conqueror. You know, you get down to 12.5 kilometers. The Lion and the Monarch are like this as well. You know, looking further down the line, you know, the tier 10, it's kind of the pinnacle of the line, but this is, you know, the line's trait up and down. But speaking of the rest of the line, the British battleship line is a very comfortable grind all the way up and down. I really can't think of a sore spot in the line anymore. Monarch, the tier 8, which everyone used to say was a sore spot for the British battleship line, they give the Monarch an improved heal now. So it's just a party in the Monarch now. Like, the King George V is excellent. The Lion, that's another one everyone says is a terrible ship, but like, I've never really had a bad time in the Lion. The British battleship line was the second line I grinded through back in the day, and that was way before any of the modern changes to Lion, and it was fine. It was a really easy grind for me, so I don't get why Lion gets all the hate. But yeah, like, the Lion's pretty comfortable, I guess. According to everyone else, the Lion's pretty bad, but again, not really an issue in my mind. So it's a solid line to grind all the way up and down. So if you don't like cruisers, you like HE spamming, you like burning things down and bullying other ships, the Conqueror line is very much for you. Conqueror HE, by the way, can, oddly enough, citadel a fair amount of cruisers at tier 10 as well, especially like some of the super light cruisers like the Kitakami and such. But again, the short fuse AP does a pretty good job of that as well. Alright, next up in the British tech tree is the St. Vincent. Oh, the St. Vinny line is so much fun. The St. Vincent is a battle cruiser line. The St. Vincent line is a battle cruiser line. And these ships, Wargaming did a very good job of making sure that these British battle cruisers are different from the British battleships, but still manage to maintain a a lot of the same characteristics. Now, this is a full line as well. It's not a little stub as well. And just like the Conqueror line, the St. Vincent line up and down is a pretty good, pretty comfortable grind for me all the way up and down. Some highlights are the Hawk, in my opinion. And, of course, the St. Vincent herself. So, the British battle cruisers get British BBHE. It's not quite as good as the British Battleship HE, but it's still better than your standard, run-of-the-mill Battleship HE. They still get the short fuse time on the AP as well, so that's great. And they get hull-mounted torpedoes. So unlike other ships which have torpedo tubes bolted to their deck, the St. Vincent line gets these hull-mounted torpedoes with these firing angles where the torpedo will exit the ship, turn to the direction you fired them in, then carry on about their way. And then when you get to the higher tier ships, these torpedoes, you start to lose torpedo tubes, but you start to gain torpedo alpha. Like the St. Vincent's torpedoes, they do like, 28 to 29,000 damage, which is insane. So like you hit like most tier 10 ships with that, that's going to hurt them quite a bit, so that's pretty fun. They're also in the bow too, so like if you're running at them, you can, send your torpedo on the way and then watch them lose 30k HP right if you hit them in the bow where there isn't any torpedo protection. So that's pretty good. You also get, again, at higher tiers, engine boost, which is very nice for these battle cruisers to have. They're very agile as well, especially when you have that engine boost going. They do surprisingly have, at higher tier, better-ish secondaries. I wouldn't recommend a secondary build, but when you're running at enemy ships and, burning them down through HE or blapping them with your large caliber AP, it's nice to have that little bit of damage on there as well. Speaking of large caliber guns, you do get larger guns as the line goes up, peaking out with the St. Vincent having 457mm guns, which are, of course, ludicrous. You get 9 of those guns in this configuration. So that's fun. And with the improved heal, the maneuverability, the guns in the HE, you can do pretty stupid things in the St. Vincent. They really are a mid to close range, leaning more towards close range style of battle cruiser. What I typically do with the St. Vincent is I will begin the match, spamming HE at range, then as the match progresses, I'll close in, swap it over to AP, and start blapping things with that 18-inch AP, so that's good fun. You can also do a pretty dumb build like I have on my St. Vincent right now, where you have the Furious skill, where, when you have fires and floods going on your ship, you get a boost to your reload time. You do that because you have the improved heal with you, so that's pretty good in my opinion. I wouldn't recommend you doing that as a new player. Do a more standard main battery build with the St. Vincent, and it will still do very fine. But if you want to do something goofy like that with the St. Vincent, you very much can. Of course, these are battle cruisers, so they don't have that 32mm bow and stern anymore. They have a 20. Well, again, depending upon where you're at on the line, they have a thinner extremity armor than their same tier counterparts, which means you can get overmatched by the common battleship caliber guns at that tier. That is, of course, a trade-off for their increased speed and maneuverability, but very fun line, a line I would very much recommend. Next up, we have the Italians with their single battleship line, the Cristoforo Colombo line. The Colombo line, it's a slog. I'm not gonna lie. It takes some will to get through it. They have been going through and they have been buffing the main battery accuracy and sigma of the Italian battleships over the past couple of years. It was so bad before because the Italian battleships, their thing is SAP. They have SAP guns for the main battery guns, which means you have battleship caliber SAP, which means you have a ridiculous amount of alpha damage per shell because it's SAP. The way it was balanced out back in the day was by them having terrible dispersion and terrible sigma, but they were very much designed with a skill in mind that was called Deadeye, where when you were undetected, you got a 10% buff to your dispersion. That was a thing when the Italian battleships came out. It was subsequently removed, and they were kind of left high and dry. But again, they've been buffing the dispersion and the sigma of the mid-tier Italian battleships. Still a bit of a slog to get through, though. But when you get to the Lepanto, or really now it's the Littorio, it's a bit better, but still a bit of a slog. But the Colombo, my god, very much worth it in today's World of Warships. Especially if you have the unique upgrade for the Colombo, which if you get the Colombo, the next thing you need to turn around and do, I would suggest, is grind that unique upgrade for the Colombo, because you get a buff to your dispersion and a buff to your reload, and it is magical what this does to the Colombo. The Colombo goes from being like a good tier 10 to being perhaps one of the most busted ships in the game, with those 16, 15-inch sap shells flying toward your target. It's not uncommon to see you rip like 28, 29, sometimes 30,000 damage out of one salvo with that unique upgrade. It is stupid. But what else about the Colombo line? Well, the Italian battleships' other gimmick is the fact that they have a exhaust smoke generator, which means you can smoke up and go undetected. Now, the thing about this is that sure, the enemy can't get a lock on you, but don't think that they have no idea where you're at.
You have no idea where I am!
Because there's a giant battleship smoke screen in front of them. They know where you're at. They just can't lock you with the main battery guns. They very much can still blind fire that smoke, and the amount of times I've been blind fired in Colombo smoke and, you know, gotten a fire started or something, it's annoyingly high. But again, they can't lock you, and it's a good tool to get out of a bad situation and reposition. It's also a good tool to sneak up on unsuspecting ships, because some players, they don't use their eyeballs. They rely on the game to tell them everything. They rely on that little, yellow icon to pop up that lets them know they're detected. So it's very much possible to get uncomfortably close with the Colombo to the enemy ships if you're rushing down a flank or something. And the AP on the Colombo is not bad either. Now, you should definitely primarily be using SAP with the Colombo, but the AP shells, if you got someone's broadside, by all means, go ahead, because a Citadel with the AP shell does more damage than penetration damage does with SAP shells, but in most cases, you'd definitely be using SAP. The Italian battleships, they have really good armor, especially from the bow in. When you get to the Colombo as well, you get 360-degree turrets with the rear two turrets, which is really great for keeping that bow on profile to the enemy ships, and not having to wait for the turrets to take the long way around when you're swapping from a target from your port to starboard and vice versa. Excellent line for that. These are definitely mid-range ships with the dispersion that you get on the main battery guns, and they are very much well geared to that with, again, their smokescreen and their armor. So, a bit of a slog to get through, but Colombo 125% worth it in my opinion. Speaking of close-range ships, next up is the German battleships. Starting out with the Preußen line. Oh my god, the Preußen line. How this line has gone through an identity shift. So, the Preußen line. The Preußen wasn't always the tier 10 in the German battleship line. It used to be the GK. But a few years ago, Wargaming decided they were going to remove the GK and put the Preußen in place. The Preußen is exactly the same in every single way, shape, and form to the GK, with the exception of the main battery guns. You trade out GK's 12 16-inch guns for 8 18-inch guns. With a really good reload time if you build into it. You have like a 20-second reload on 8 18-inch guns with German AP, which hits hard and penetrates very, very well, which that's pretty dang good. Which led to most players building to the main battery of the Preußen instead of the secondaries like you would with the GK. And, it does fit the line a little bit better in terms of, the main battery gun layout because, Bismarck had the 8 guns, so did the FDG, then you got to the GK, then suddenly, you have 12 guns. But now the Preußen, you have 8 guns again, and they're of an 18-inch caliber as well. So, that led to, more players building into the main battery guns of the FDG and the Bismarck, and turns out when you do that and you build into the reload on those ships, definitely makes them a lot more comfortable to play in today's World of Warships, because you can't very much play these ships as secondary ships. They have good secondaries, they have good secondary ranges, they have the German 128s once you get up to the Preußen, which means you can fit in 32 millimeters of armor without IFHE. If you take IFHE on the FDG, you can get those guys putting 32 millimeters of armor as well. So, they are pretty good secondary ships, but of course, with today's World of Warships, unless you are a full tilt secondary ship, which the German battleship line unfortunately isn't, it's not really going to happen in most cases. Now, of course, it can still happen when the match devolves to that point, but of course doesn't really happen in today's World of Warships. But building to the main battery guns with, building to the accuracy and the reload with those modules on the FDG and the Preußen definitely makes up for their lackluster brawling capabilities in today's World of Warships. So I would suggest you build into the main battery guns, use them as tanks because they have excellent armor from medium to close range, and just, be slinging those 16-inch or 18-inch shells downrange every, 20-something seconds with the main battery reload build that you can get on the Preußen and the FDG. Now, of course, if you want to build them as secondaries, you can, and they can still work. I'm not saying that they can't work. I'm just saying, compared to what we also have up for offer in the secondary world today, they are a little lackluster. The GK is still pretty solid, though, because, it's got 12 guns instead of 8, so you're throwing more shells at the wall. So if you do, acquire the GK in the armory and go secondary build the GK, she can still very much work. But yeah, the FDG and the Preußen, not so much today. The Bismarck still can do it because tier 8, tier 8 matchmaking, get into those tier 7, tier 6 games. That's a different story from tier 8, 8, 9, and 10 matches, right? So there's that. But yeah, these are more of think of them as super large, heavy cruisers. Play them at medium range, get slinging that German AP down range as fast as you possibly can. Make up for your lackluster accuracy and dispersion through volume of fire. And you have a pretty good time. And plus, the Preußen does have 18-inch guns, 457. So again, you can overmatch 30 millimeters of armor with those guns. So there's a lot of potential there for sure. And if you're on the all flank and the enemy team's having to push into you, and you're a tank build, Preußen or FDG, my God, you can last for a very, very long time with one of those builds on those ships, thanks to their large HP pools and their excellent armor for medium to close range. Now, if you do want a secondary experience, that brings us to our second German battleship line, the Schlieffen line, which are a line of battle cruisers. Now, the Schlieffen, yes, the Schlieffen line, fantastic line. Just like the British battle cruiser line, I can't think of a bad spot in this line. I loved grinding through every single one of these ships. These are hyper brawlers, the Schlieffen especially. So what you get here is battle cruisers with a ton of secondary guns, especially when you get from tier 8 on up. They're fast, they get torpedoes, they get hydro, they get the fast damage con, which has the short run time, but also short cooldown time, however, a limited number of them. Oh my God, these ships are so much fun. These guys probably save brawling in World of Warships because these guys can very much make brawling work in today's World of Warships. Not only do they have a lot of secondary guns and good secondary range, they also have good concealment as well. The Schlieffen, for example, you get her secondary range down to her detection range, which means that when you are spotted, whatever is spotting you is within your secondary range. So that's excellent. Now they do have not the best armor and not the best HP numbers. They have smaller HP numbers. They have weaker armor, very much like the British battle cruisers as well. But their armor is a little bit more well-tuned for brawling, like the Schlieffen has an icebreaker bow that covers most of her very thin bow armor, because just like the British, they do have thinner bow armor than their same tier counterparts, which means that common battleship caliber guns at that tier can overmatch them, but that icebreaker bow does very much save the Schlieffen, and like the Ruprecht has that as well, so that helps out a lot. They are very fast, so that does, they are battle cruisers, right? So you can close that distance that much better. You get long-range torpedoes at higher tier 2, so you can just toss those downrange, and you'd be surprised what you can get with them. But, like the Schlieffen, like you can see, it's just bristling with secondary guns. So you build into those secondary guns, build into your concealment, take IFHE, they're pinning 32 millimeters of armor, there's a gajillion of them. It's an excellent line, and if you want to brawl, the Schlieffen line is 125% for you. Alright, taking a step back and going with the Japanese battleships now. So, very much unlike the German battleships, the Japanese battleships, especially both lines, they are very much mid to long range ships with the Yamato and the Bungo. The Yamato line is, it's an interesting line. It's very interesting what they did here with the what they didn't do here with the Japanese battleship and the battlecruiser line. So the Yamato line is a mix of battleships and battlecruisers. oddly enough. But the general gist of the Yami line is that you will have one of two things going for you. You will have a large number of average caliber guns at that tier, or you will have a small number of large caliber guns at that tier, depending upon where you're going up and down the Yamato line. So, because of that, the Japanese battleship dispersion is a little weird because they have to balance, out the fact that you either have a large number of guns or a small number of large guns at that tier. So the Japanese dispersion is this really weird dispersion pattern that's kind of terrible, but again, it's made up for the fact that, you have the guns that you have. So there's that. And for the most part, the Japanese battleship line's a pretty good grind. The Izumo, the Tier 9, used to be the sore spot in the line, but it's probably honestly one of the better Tier 9 battleships in today's World of Warships. It is very weird going from, like, the Amagi, which you can see the Amagi, the evolution going up through the line. Then you get to the Izumo, which is like this weird Japanese Nelson, and then you get to the Yami, so there's that. So you go from a line of battle cruisers and fast battleships to dreadnoughts with the Izumo, and then of course a super mega dreadnought with the Yamato. Now of course the Yamato, when you get there, you get the 18.1 inch guns, which can overmatch 32 millimeters of armor, which means you really don't care about armor too much with the Yami. She is, of course, a super dreadnought, so she's slow, tops out at 27.5 knots. Her armor is really, really good at range, as is most of the, Tier 8 up Japanese battleships. Like, good luck citadeling an Amagi or an Izumo at range, first off, right? The Yamato, it's not going to happen unless you eat, 20-inch shells from, a super battleship or something like that. But closer range, that's where the weakness of the Yami armor comes up. It's this weird octagonal citadel, which means you have these flat spots from certain angles looking at the Yamato's bow or stern. So if anyone knows that, they can just shoot you there, get citadels from close range. Yeah, you definitely want to play the Yamato from medium range back. She's very much comfortable, especially if you get her unique upgrade, which again, like the Columbus, I would highly, highly recommend. It improves her dispersion by another 7% at the cost of her turret rotation, which is already so long. Who cares if it's a little bit longer? But Yami, one of the oldest ships in the game, still very much has it in my opinion because you can overmatch 32 millimeters of armor. And maybe not the first battleship line you should grind, but definitely, it's... I wouldn't go too much further past, third or fourth before checking out the Yami, because she's just, really solid in today's World of Warships. Lackluster AA up and down the Japanese battleship line, all in all, just to let you know as well. So, the other Japanese line, the Bungo line, the battle cruiser line, this is a short line. It's only the Tier 8, 9, and 10. These guys have, a large number of large caliber guns for their tier going up and down the line, especially with the Bungo having many 18-inch guns. She gets 10 18-inch guns at Tier 10, but they are not 460s, they are 457s. And this line also uses, I'm not sure if it's a World War I shell, but it's a very weird AP shell, where their penetration at range is actually not overly great. The Bungo does kind of make up for it for the fact that just the shells are just so freaking big, right? But with the Adatara and such, it's a little bit of a struggle bus. But you do get the precision optics spotter plane. When you send that bad boy up, you get a 10% buff to your dispersion, which means you can make some pretty goofy things happen with the Bungo and her lower tier counterparts, because you get that buff to your dispersion, which is, of course, very lovely. Now, despite being battle cruisers, they actually aren't really that fast. In fact, they're slower than most of their same tier counterparts, which is odd because, battle cruisers, they're meant to be, fast ships that can run down cruisers and such, but the Bungo line can't, but they still get the thinner armor because battle cruiser, right? So yeah, but that's made up for the fact that you do have, again, a large number of large caliber guns at your tier with the Bungo. So if you like more of a sniping battleship, the Bungo line is very much for you, although the Yami can do that as well. But the Yami, you can kind of push up later in the match with the Yami, because you still have that 32 millimeter bow and stern, so you still can bow tank like late game if you need to. But the Bungo, you can't really do that. You gotta be paying attention to where you're at, kind of like with the Vermont, because you are slower than your same tier battleships and ships in general. So yeah, Bungo's more like a side grade to the Yami than a completely different playstyle. So there's that. Alright, going our way down now to the French with the Republique. Man, the French battleship line, it's just weird. So the French line, up until the Alsace, which is the tier 9, which is probably one of the best tier 9 battleships in game, they have a large number of smaller caliber guns for their tier. They're fast with their engine boost, because they get an engine boost, and they can run down flanks, find broadside ships, pump AP into their broadside. That's the French battleship thing. Then you get to the Republic, which turns into a Graf Spee, a very large Graf Spee with 2 turrets, 4 guns per turret. So, yeah, okay, you'd expect it to be an Alsace with a 4th turret, but no. However, you do get a very fast reload if you build into the reload on the Republic. You get a 19-second reload on 17.5-inch guns, which does push you over the threshold for overmatching 30 millimeters of armor. So now you can also bully cruisers with the Republic as well, and of course ships like the Bungo and the St. Vincent and the Schlieffen, because they don't have those 32 millimeter extremities, every 19 seconds. It's pretty good. That also means that if you can't overmatch their armor, you can just, hit one and swap to HE and start burning ships down with your HE with the Republic, which you have to do with the other French battleships anyway, because they do have smaller caliber guns for their tier. Like the Alsace has 15-inch guns at tier 9, but she gets 12 of them, right? So, you're throwing enough HE at the problem to burn it down. That's kind of the thing going up and down the French battleship line, and they have good AP, very hard-hitting AP, but their dispersion is not that great because they have so many guns. So, more of a mid-range ship here with the engine boost and such. Find a flank, run it down, find their broadsides, blap their broadsides, swap over to HE to burn out any ship that's trying to bow tank you, and very nice for dealing with destroyers too. Throwing a large number of HE shells at them as well. They are coated in like the higher tiers are coated in 32 millimeters of armor, so they can get farmed down very easily by light cruiser spam. That's kind of the same for the rest of the French line as well, so do be aware of that. But I find them to be a pretty fun, enjoyable line, of a fast battleship line for sure. And one, if you kind of like more of like a cruisery play style where you're always on the move, either spamming HE or blapping ships with AP, it's a good line for you with the French battleships. All right, our second to last battleship line that we're taking a look at is the Kremlin. Man, the Kremlin has gone through she's gone through it in today's World of Warships, because the Kremlin, when she came out, was like the poster child of Russian bias. The ship with godly armor, a gazillion hit points, 47mm guns with the Soviet bias AP. Man, this thing was wild. And then she kept getting nerfed and nerfed and nerfed and nerfed, and the game changed over the years. And yeah, Kremlin's still good when you get in close, 'cause that's the Russian battleship thing. They have excellent armor if you are angled in, bow into the target. They have great AP with the Soviet bias AP, and they have the Soviet dispersion gimmick, which kind of doesn't work in my opinion, it seems, because the way that the Soviet battleship dispersion gimmick is supposed to work is that the closer you are to the target, the better your dispersion is supposed to be. Yet you'll see in the background footage, I'm like 8 kilometers away from the enemy, and the shells are still very much going all over the place, which doesn't make any sense because they're not supposed to be doing that. So sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. Seems like RNG still gets it there, just throws the shells all over the place at times. But anyway, what you get with the Russian battleships is great armor when you're angled. They play like every other Soviet large ship in the game. They can bow tank for years, but if you find their side, their citadel is exposed, and you can very much, delete half of their HP, if not delete the entire ship in one salvo. I've deleted so many GKs, so many Kremlins with my GK back in the day, because the Kremlin had this stigma about it, that it was this invincible ship. But if you just walk up to it and anything that's well armored enough, you ambush them, you get to their side, you can very much delete it just like any other battleship that has an exposed citadel. So there's a very fine line between bouncing everything and 1991. So be aware of that if you're playing the Soviet battleships. But they do have really, really good armor when they are battle tanking, and they get the fast damage con. They are the first battleship line to get this damage con, where again the damage con runs for a very short time, but it's back in a very short time as well. The Soviet battleships are pretty good up and down the line. The Sinop, the Tier 7, is probably the jewel of the line. It is a bully at Tier 7. Like Tier 7 ranked or anything, definitely take the Sinop. She has 16-inch guns, great armor, the Soviet dispersion from closer ranges. So, yeah, it's just insane. They tend to be very long ships, though, so the turrets angles aren't overly fantastic. You do have to show a little bit of ankle to get that third turret in on the action in most cases, which brings about that citadel being exposed. So be mindful about that. So the Kremlin, if you like getting the Kremlin line, if you like getting close, you like getting in people's faces with heavy, hard-hitting main battery guns, tanking for days, having a ton of HP and a ton of armor, look no further than the Kremlin line. Alright, lastly, the newest addition to the game, the Libertad line, when talking about battleships at least. Oh man, the Libertad line. The Libertad, I forgot the name, the Los Andes, and whatever the Tier 8's called. I can't remember it right now. No, the Ipiranga, there we go. I remembered all three of them. Yeah, these things are, even after their nerfs, they are still incredibly, incredibly powerful when it comes to being secondary ships. So the Pan American battleship thing is that they are dreadnoughts that are faster than most other dreadnoughts, and for a time were more maneuverable than most fast battleships, so yeah. But they have amazing secondary guns. You get on the Tier 9 and the Tier 10 at least, in fact, cruiser caliber guns, heavy cruiser caliber guns as secondary guns. You have Goliath turrets bolted up and down your ship, which is kind of friggin' dumb, but hey, it's secondary, so this is pretty lit, right? Anyway, in exchange for that, you get less HP than normal at Tier 10. The Libertad, for example, has 85-ish thousand HP. Most other Tier 10 battleships are sitting comfortable around 100-ish thousand HP. But, of course, you have the secondaries to make up for that, along with a pretty good detection range and the secondary funny button, the F button, which will extend your secondary range out to, for example, with the Libertad, out to 15-ish kilometers, which is so dumb, so dumb. It also decreases the reload time for your secondary guns, and it increases their penetration. So that's stupid as hell. But hey, it works. It definitely works when murdering things down with your secondary guns. The downsides of this line, like I said, the lower HP. You have some fairly lackluster armor for being a brawling ship, although you do get the improved heal to make up for that. They're great if you can catch a ship or two off guard. You rush around the corner, you start melting them with your secondaries. They don't have a whole lot of longevity there because their armor isn't that great. Like, you can't sit on a flank and like kite and just be tanking shells like you can with a GK, keeping the enemy team's focus on you forever, because eventually they will go down, eventually, right? Essentially much faster than you would survive in like a GK or something like that. The main battery guns are also fairly decent. The Libertad, for example, gets 12 16-inch guns with pretty solid AP, although, the turret angles aren't all that great because it is a, dreadnought-style battleship. So you get pretty good main battery guns, amazing secondary guns. Used to have a high degree of speed and mobility, but that got nerfed a little while ago. Well, the speed didn't get nerfed, but their rudder shift time did. But you get the, the funny button with the secondary guns, and, you'll be chewing through ships in no time flat with, literally Goliath caliber secondary guns chewing down the enemy ships. So not really secondary guns, they really are in most cases your main source of damage with the Libertad line for sure. So if you like secondaries, you like hyper brawling, definitely the line for you. One of the best secondary lines in the game for sure right now, no questions about that. So guys, that is my run through of each of the lines. I hope that I could help you make a decision on what line you wish to grind. If you want to know like commanders and such, unique commanders, check out my unique commander guide here, where I go over every single unique commander in the game, at least at the time that video was made, and talk about, you know, what you should build with, what you should build them, whether or not they're worth your time and effort trying to acquire them. So guys, hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, make sure to drop a like, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel for more videos like this, and hope to catch you guys in the next one.